The new girl at our school stole 3 boyfriends in 2 weeks, so the entire school turned against her, and someone put laxatives in her food. When I visited her in the psychiatric hospital, she told me she was going to destroy some things herself very soon. There was this girl, Juliana, who transferred to our school right after winter break. Within exactly 2 weeks, she had somehow stolen 3 different boyfriends from the most popular girls in school. At least that's the story that spread like wildfire. My best friend literally grabbed my arm in the hallway after the 3rd breakup and was like, "I'm serious, stay away from that girl." She completely destroyed Lily's 2-year relationship, and now Thomas won't even look at Lily anymore. The teacher seemed genuinely uncomfortable around Juliana too. It was so obvious. Whenever students tried to sit near her in class, they'd suddenly announce new seating arrangements or find reasons to move people around. She ate lunch completely alone every single day, sitting at this corner table while literally the entire cafeteria buzzed with whispers. Boys wouldn't even make eye contact with her when she walked by, and I swear some girls would actually hiss under their breath. It was like watching someone navigate a minefield, but something felt really off about the whole thing, and I was curious. I tried sitting near her once in chemistry before our teacher suddenly decided we needed better lab partnerships and moved me. Honestly, she just seemed completely normal, maybe even nicer than most people. I started paying attention to Juliana over the next few weeks, and watching her life at school become absolute hell was honestly traumatizing. Girls organized full boycotts against any group project that included her name. Someone carved homewrecker into her locker, but the thing that made me physically sick, someone put laxatives in her lunch, and she got violently ill in the main hallway, while people literally laughed and pulled out their phones to record her humiliation. But here's what really screwed with my head. Juliana never once fought back or defended herself. She tutored struggling freshmen for free during study hall. She volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend. I know because my cousin works there. When people spread the most vicious lies about her, she just absorbed it all. For someone supposedly manipulative enough to destroy relationships, she was weirdly generous and selfless. It didn't add up at all. Then came the party that changed everything. It was Rebecca's house party, her parents were out of town, and basically the entire junior class was there. I was in the upstairs bathroom when I heard this commotion in the hallway. Dylan had cornered this sophomore girl Jen against the wall. She looked terrified and kept saying, "Please stop," while he kept pushing closer, clearly hammered and getting aggressive. Everyone else just walked by like nothing was happening. Some people were even filming and laughing like it was entertainment. This girl was obviously in distress and nobody cared. That's when Juliana appeared out of nowhere and shoved herself between them. When he started getting hostile and threatened to ruin both their nights, Juliana pulled out her phone and started recording. "Go ahead, keep talking. I'm sure your scholarship committee would love to see this side of their star athlete." Dylan actually backed down. Juliana made sure Jen got safely to her friends and then disappeared back into the crowd like nothing happened. But I saw the whole thing, and it was the most fearless thing I'd ever witnessed. You'd think witnessing her protect someone would change how people saw her, right? Think again. By Monday morning, the story had completely flipped. Dylan was telling everyone that Juliana had been stalking him all night and trying to start drama. People said she was desperate for attention and probably staged the whole thing with Jen. The worst part? Jen, who Juliana had literally saved, went along with it. She claimed nothing serious was happening and that Juliana misunderstood the situation. The peer pressure was so intense that Jen threw her own protector under the bus just to avoid becoming a target herself. Juliana got suspended pending a full investigation, but the absolute breaking point came when someone hacked into Juliana's social media accounts and leaked her private messages with her therapist from a mental health app. Screenshots of her discussing trauma, family issues, and self-harm thoughts spread through every group chat and social media platform. People were sharing her most vulnerable moments like memes. Kids started leaving printouts of her therapy messages taped to her locker. Parents received anonymous emails with her private mental health information, warning them that Juliana was dangerous and unstable. The worst part? Everyone felt justified. They genuinely believed they were protecting the school from her. I tried texting Juliana, but my messages wouldn't deliver. Then I heard she was in the hospital. I found her in the psychiatric facility looking so small and broken. That's when she showed me the restraining order Dylan put out against her, meaning she could no longer come back to school. She broke down and admitted that she had never dated anyone since she got to the school. She just befriended a few of the guys and gave them relationship advice. They decided they didn't want to be with their girlfriends anymore, but instead of telling them why, they just said they fell for Jen, then staged a breakup. And Jen went along with it because they asked. She didn't realize it would lead to her destruction. She told me not to worry though. She was going to destroy some things herself very soon. I left the psychiatric facility with my hands shaking. The way Juliana had smiled when she mentioned destroying things made my stomach turn. Outside, I fumbled with my phone and noticed 17 missed calls from Jen. My fingers hesitated over her name before I finally called back. Jen answered on the first ring, her voice cracking with panic. She started rambling about needing to talk immediately. Something about Dylan deleting everything from his social media. I told her I'd meet her at the coffee shop near school in 20 minutes. The drive there gave me time to process what I'd just witnessed. Juliana's transformation from broken victim to someone plotting revenge had happened so fast. Her eyes had gone cold when she'd mentioned destroying things. The girl who'd saved Jen at the party seemed completely gone. I found Jen hunched over a corner table, her laptop open and phone in hand. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She grabbed my wrist the moment I sat down and pulled me closer to the screen. Dylan's Instagram page showed nothing but a default profile picture. His Twitter, Facebook, even his LinkedIn, all wiped clean. Jen's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up cached versions of his pages. She showed me how systematic the deletion was. Every photo, every post, every comment from the past 3 years had vanished overnight. Even tagged photos on other people's profiles were somehow gone. I asked her why she cared so much about Dylan's social media purge. That's when her face crumpled. She admitted she'd been lying about more than just the party incident. Her hands trembled as she opened a hidden folder on her laptop. The folder contained screenshots of text messages between Juliana and Jen's ex-boyfriend from months before any of the breakups happened. My blood ran cold reading them. Juliana had been asking detailed questions about Jen's relationship, her insecurities, past arguments. The messages dated back to before Juliana even transferred to our school. Jen explained how she discovered them accidentally when borrowing her ex's phone weeks ago, but had been too scared to tell anyone. The shame in her voice was crushing. She'd thrown Juliana under the bus at the party to protect herself from becoming the next target, knowing Juliana had orchestrated her own breakup. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin at the animal shelter. She mentioned something odd about Juliana's volunteer orientation from months ago. Apparently, Juliana had spent more time asking about the other volunteers than learning about animal care. She'd taken detailed notes about everyone's families, their jobs, their financial situations. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see. I asked Jen to forward me those screenshots, but she hesitated. Reading them would mean accepting that the girl I'd defended, the girl I'd believed was an innocent victim, had been playing everyone from the start. Jen's laptop dinged with a new message. Dylan wanted to meet both of us urgently. He said he had proof of something bigger than we realized. Against my better judgment, we agreed to meet him at the abandoned warehouse where kids sometimes went to skateboard. Dylan looked terrible when we arrived. His usual confidence was completely gone, replaced by paranoia. He kept checking over his shoulder while explaining why he'd deleted everything. Apparently, Juliana had been collecting information on everyone for months, and he'd just discovered she had recordings of private conversations. He pulled out his phone and played an audio file. It was his voice talking to his friend about Jen, discussing intimate details about their relationship, things only he should have known. The recording quality was too clear to be accidental. Juliana had deliberately recorded him. Dylan revealed that 2 other ex-boyfriends had contacted him with similar discoveries. Juliana had recordings of all of them, had used the information to manipulate them into breaking up with their girlfriends. She'd threatened to release the recordings if they ever told the truth about why they really ended their relationships. The manipulation ran deeper than anyone imagined. Dylan showed us messages where Juliana had systematically shared each girlfriend's deepest insecurities with their boyfriends, poisoning the relationships from within. She'd presented it as friendly advice, as trying to help them understand their girlfriends better. I thought about all those times I'd seen Juliana tutoring students or helping at the shelter. Had every kind act been calculated? Had she been gathering information the entire time? My cousin's text seemed to confirm it. Juliana's kindness had been a weapon. Rebecca appeared at the warehouse entrance, surprising all of us. She'd been following Dylan, worried about his erratic behavior. When she heard what we were discussing, her face went pale. She admitted Juliana had tried to counsel her weeks ago about her boyfriend's supposed cheating. The details Juliana had known were too specific, too private, things Rebecca had only discussed with her boyfriend in their apartment. Rebecca realized now that Juliana must have been monitoring their conversations somehow, though she couldn't figure out how. We spent the next hour comparing notes, and the pattern became undeniable. Juliana had targeted specific people, gathered intelligence through calculated friendliness, then used that information to destroy relationships. The boyfriends were just tools. She'd manipulated them into ending things to make herself look like the victim. But why? What was the point of destroying random relationships? Dylan mentioned something that made my blood freeze. He'd overheard Juliana on the phone at the party, speaking in code about family debts and old grudges. She'd mentioned our town specifically, said something about payback being overdue. I remembered Juliana's threat at the psychiatric facility about destroying things. This wasn't random at all. She'd come here with a plan, and we'd all been too focused on the wrong story to see it. The popular girls weren't her targets. They were collateral damage. Jen's phone rang, making us all jump. Her little sister was crying, saying someone had been calling the house and threatening Jen. Realizing just how deep this goes with Juliana secretly recording private conversations and planning all this before she even moved to their school. Poor Dylan looks so scared and paranoid now, and I can't blame him after finding out she has all those recordings of him talking about personal stuff with his friends. The caller said Jen needed to maintain her story about the party, or things would get much worse for their family. We decided to go to my house to figure out our next move. My parents were at work, giving us privacy to sort through everything we discovered. I made coffee while the others spread out all the evidence on my dining room table. Looking at it all laid out, the screenshots, the recordings, the timeline of events, the scope of Juliana's manipulation was staggering. She'd spent months preparing, researching, positioning herself. The transfer to our school hadn't been random at all. Dylan pulled up his cached Facebook data and found something disturbing. Juliana had been viewing profiles of students from our school for 6 months before she transferred. She'd studied our social dynamics, identified the key relationships, mapped out the connections between families. I called my cousin to ask more about Juliana's volunteer work. She checked the shelter records and discovered Juliana had specifically requested shifts that overlapped with certain volunteers, all of whom had parents working at local banks or businesses. The revelation hit me hard. This wasn't about teenage drama or stealing boyfriends. Juliana had been gathering intelligence on our families, our parents' work, our financial situations. The relationship destruction was just a cover for something bigger. Rebecca remembered something else. During one of their conversations, Juliana had asked detailed questions about Rebecca's father's business, about their family's connections in town. She'd framed it as friendly interest, but now it seemed calculating and purposeful. We tried contacting Juliana's previous school, but the administration wouldn't share information about former students. Dylan had better luck through social media, connecting with a student journalist who'd covered Juliana's sudden departure from their school. The journalist's story made our situation even clearer. Juliana had left her previous school after rumors surfaced about her exploiting a classmate's mental health crisis for attention. She'd positioned herself as a supportive friend, gained access to private information, then used it to manipulate multiple people. The pattern was identical. Destroyed relationships, gathered intelligence, positioned herself as a victim when exposed. The journalist mentioned that Juliana's family had business disputes in that town too, though details were vague. My parents came home early, surprised to find the group in our dining room. When I started explaining what we'd discovered, my mother's face went white. She exchanged a look with my father that made my stomach drop. They revealed something that changed everything. Our family had history with Juliana's family, old business tensions from years ago. My father's company had won a contract that Juliana's father had desperately wanted. The loss had apparently caused significant financial problems for their family. The room went silent as we processed this information. I'd been targeted not randomly, but specifically. Juliana had researched me, befriended me, made me her defender. Every interaction had been calculated to position me as her ally. My mother made calls to other parents while we continued piecing together the full picture. Several families had similar stories. Old business rivalries, competed contracts, professional conflicts with Juliana's family. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. Dylan's phone buzzed with messages from the other ex-boyfriends. They were ready to come forward with their evidence, tired of being blackmailed into silence. The recordings Juliana had threatened them with were illegally obtained. She had no real power over them anymore. We agreed to meet again tomorrow to coordinate our response. response. As everyone left, I felt the weight of what we'd uncovered. Juliana wasn't a victim or a villain in some teenage drama. She was something far more dangerous, a calculating manipulator using our trust to gather intelligence for her family's vendetta. That night, I lay awake thinking about every interaction with Juliana, every kind gesture, every moment of vulnerability, every time she'd seemed like a victim. It had all been performance. The girl in the psychiatric facility promising to destroy things wasn't making empty threats. She was declaring war. The next morning, Juliana was back from the psychiatric facility. I saw her walking through the school parking lot, head held high, that same unsettling smile playing at her lips. Within hours, my phone started buzzing with concerned messages from friends. Apparently, Juliana had been sharing private conversations I'd had with her during our friendship, things I'd told her in confidence about my struggles with anxiety, my parents' financial stress, even embarrassing childhood stories I'd never told anyone else. She'd twisted everything just enough to make me look unstable and attention-seeking. The messages spread through group chats faster than I could respond. Friends started pulling away, giving me strange looks in the hallway. I realized with a sick feeling that she was using the exact same tactics on me that she'd used on the boyfriends, isolating me, making me seem untrustworthy, turning my own vulnerabilities into weapons. I recognized the pattern immediately. This wasn't random retaliation. She was systematically dismantling my credibility before I could expose her. Every move was calculated, every shared secret strategically deployed. I felt like prey being circled by a predator who knew exactly where to strike. Meanwhile, Jen had decided she couldn't stay silent anymore. She'd been wrestling with her conscience all night and wanted to come forward with the truth about the party. But somehow, Juliana had anticipated this. Before Jen could say anything publicly, her most embarrassing secrets started appearing online. Private photos she'd sent to her ex, screenshots of her venting about her parents' divorce, even her therapy appointment records. The preemptive strike was devastating. Jen's reputation crumbled overnight. Nobody would listen to her now about what really happened at the party. She'd been neutralized as a witness before she could even speak. The precision of Juliana's information warfare was terrifying. Dylan reached out to me that afternoon, his paranoia now seeming completely justified. He'd been digging deeper into Juliana's past and discovered something disturbing. Her family had been forced to leave their previous town after similar business disputes, a pattern of conflicts that always seemed to end with the other families suffering mysterious setbacks, failed businesses, leaked private information, destroyed reputations. We started documenting everything meticulously. Every text, every interaction, every piece of evidence needed to be preserved. I learned to screenshot conversations immediately, knowing Juliana had ways of making digital evidence disappear. The paranoia was exhausting, but necessary. The police had reviewed the party incident, but the conflicting witness statements and timeline inconsistencies created a legal stalemate. Juliana's version of events was just plausible enough, her counter evidence just convincing enough. Without concrete proof, authorities couldn't act on our suspicions about her larger schemes. I spent hours online, carefully reaching out to students from Juliana's previous schools. Slowly, a network of victims emerged. Each had similar stories: initial friendship, gathered intelligence, systematic destruction when they discovered her true nature. We created a private group to share information and support each other. Through this network, I learned that Juliana's volunteer work had darker purposes. She'd used her position at various charities to gather information on struggling families, financial problems, health issues, family conflicts, all of it cataloged and stored for potential use. Her kindness had been reconnaissance. Dylan's ex-girlfriend, someone I'd barely spoken to before, approached me with crucial information. She revealed that Juliana had contacted her months before transferring to our school, posing as a concerned friend from social media. She'd spent weeks extracting information about relationship problems, presenting herself as a sympathetic ear while mining for ammunition. Former enemies were becoming allies as we recognized our shared threat. The popular girls who'd initially blamed Juliana for stealing their boyfriends now understood they'd been casualties in a larger war. We formed an unlikely coalition, united by our need to protect ourselves and expose the truth. Juliana's return to school created a new urgency. She moved through the hallways with confidence, her victim status seemingly enhanced by her psychiatric stay. Teachers treated her with extra care. Students gave her space out of guilt or fear. She'd turned her hospitalization into another weapon. During one of my visits to check on her, I'd noticed something chilling. She'd been reading books on manipulation psychology, taking detailed notes on victim behavior patterns. Her hospital stay hadn't been about healing. It had been about studying, preparing, learning new tactics. The psychiatric facility had been her training ground. As pressure mounted on her family's activities, Juliana's moves became increasingly desperate and risky. She started making mistakes, sending threats from traceable numbers, leaving digital footprints in her haste to control the narrative. The cracks in her perfect manipulation were starting to show. She made a calculated offer to forgive everyone and move forward if we'd all publicly acknowledge that we'd wronged her. The trap was obvious. She wanted public vindication that would discredit any future accusations. Our growing alliance recognized it immediately and refused to take the bait. Our core group began meeting regularly, sharing information and coordinating our response. But Juliana seemed to know about every meeting, every plan. She'd systematically attack whoever seemed most vulnerable, targeting their families, their relationships, their deepest insecurities. We were fighting a war on multiple fronts. A pattern emerged that chilled me to the bone. Juliana hadn't randomly targeted popular kids or relationship drama. Every person she'd focused on had parents working in banking, local business, or positions with access to financial information. This wasn't about teenage vendettas. It was intelligence gathering for something much bigger. Her influence extended far beyond our school. Through her family's network, they'd compromised multiple businesses, intimidated numerous families. What looked like teenage drama was actually a sophisticated operation using a teenager as cover. The scope was staggering. The investigation revealed that my father's company was among several Juliana's family had specifically targeted. Old business disputes had festered into something darker, a systematic campaign to gather intelligence and destroy competitors. I wasn't just a random friend to Juliana, I was a strategic asset. Jen found her courage despite the public humiliation. She decided that staying silent only enabled more victims. She began sharing her truth with anyone who would listen, knowing that each person who heard it was one less person Juliana could manipulate. Her bravery inspired others to speak up. The relationship between our former enemies strengthened as we realized we weren't just fighting for ourselves, we were fighting for our community's integrity. Popular kids, outcasts, athletes, theater kids, all united by the recognition that Juliana's family posed a threat to everyone. I'm actually pretty surprised Jen had the courage to speak up after everything Juliana put her through with those leaked photos and private information. That takes such incredible strength to push past that kind of public shame and still fight for what's right. I'm feeling so proud of these kids for coming together and supporting each other when they could have just stayed divided and scared. It's also really moving to see former enemies becoming friends because they understand they're all victims of the same terrible manipulation. I made a conscious choice to maintain ethical boundaries. It would have been easy to use Juliana's own tactics against her, to spread lies, manipulate information, destroy her credibility through underhanded means, but I refused. We would fight with truth, not manipulation. A direct confrontation with Juliana revealed the depth of her delusion. She genuinely believed her family had been persecuted, that their actions were justified revenge for imagined slights. Her moral framework was so distorted that she saw herself as the hero of her story, everyone else as deserving targets. Parents of affected families pooled resources to hire a private investigator. Through legitimate channels, they uncovered financial irregularities in multiple businesses Juliana's family had targeted. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling, patterns of insider information being used for profit. Juliana's support network began fracturing as community members realized they'd been manipulated. People who defended her started seeing the patterns, understanding how they'd been used to enable her targeting activities. The tide was turning. Victims from multiple schools coordinated to expose the pattern. What had seemed like isolated incidents were revealed as part of a larger strategy. Individual cases that had been dismissed were now part of an undeniable pattern of behavior spanning years and multiple communities. Resources mobilized as affected families shared knowledge and evidence. Lawyers compared notes, investigators shared findings, victims supported each other. The individual threads were weaving into a net that would eventually trap Juliana's family. I overheard a phone conversation between Juliana's parents while visiting a friend who lived near them. They were discussing keeping a low profile until the statute of limitations expires on some previous misunderstanding. The casual way they discussed evading consequences for past actions was chilling. My credibility in the community was restored as people began understanding the true scope of what I'd been trying to expose. I wasn't a troublemaker or drama seeker. I'd been trying to protect everyone from a sophisticated targeting operation. The vindication came with a sobering understanding of how much damage had already been done. Juliana's options narrowed as her family faced coordinated resistance. The businesses they'd targeted were now aware and taking precautions. The families they'd tried to exploit were sharing information. Their operation was being exposed to sunlight. A prior victim from a different school shared the most damning revelation yet. She discovered evidence that Juliana's family had been using their teenage daughter as an intelligence gatherer for years. Juliana wasn't just aware of her family's schemes. She was an active, willing participant who'd been trained since childhood. I focused on protecting potential future victims by sharing what we'd learned with other families. We created information networks, warning systems, ways to identify and resist manipulation tactics. It wasn't about revenge, it was about prevention. Law enforcement from multiple jurisdictions began taking notice. What had started as teenage drama complaints had revealed patterns of fraud, extortion, and identity theft across multiple communities. The investigation was expanding beyond our local police. Juliana's manipulation attempts began failing as the community developed immunity to her tactics. People recognized her patterns, saw through her performances. The psychological weapons she'd relied on were becoming ineffective against an informed and united community. The last holdout in our school, a naive freshman who still believed Juliana was a victim, finally saw the truth when Juliana tried to recruit her. She asked the girl to gather information about her parents' business dealings, promising friendship in exchange for intelligence. The girl reported it immediately. My reputation transformed from troublemaker to protector as people understood what I'd been fighting against. But the recognition was bittersweet. It came with the knowledge of how many people had been hurt, while others remained blind to the threat. The private investigators' findings were filed with proper authorities. Banking irregularities, patterns of insider trading, suspicious financial transactions, all pointed to a sophisticated operation using gathered intelligence for profit. The patterns were too consistent to be coincidence. Pressure from the investigation forced Juliana's family into increasingly desperate moves. They began making threats, attempting to intimidate witnesses. Their psychological warfare was escalating towards something more dangerous. The mask of civility was slipping. Juliana's true nature was fully revealed when she attempted to frame me for harassment. She created fake messages, staged incidents, tried to build a case that I was the real aggressor. But our documentation and witness network made her fabrications transparent. The personal stakes crystallized as I realized this wasn't just about me or my friends anymore. We were protecting our entire community from a family that had turned exploitation into an art form. Every person who stood up to them protected countless future victims. I demonstrated my growth by building legitimate support systems instead of engaging in the psychological warfare Juliana expected. We created survivor networks, documentation systems, communication channels that couldn't be compromised. We fought with organization, not manipulation. Key community members began rejecting Juliana's narrative as they understood the context. Business owners, school officials, parent groups, all started seeing past her victim performance to the predator beneath. The community consciousness was shifting. Multiple victim communities coordinated their testimony with law enforcement. What had been dismissed as teenage drama and isolation became undeniable as a pattern. Investigators from different jurisdictions began sharing information, building a comprehensive case. Initial victories came as Juliana's family faced their first criminal charges: financial fraud, identity theft, extortion. The charges reflected the true scope of their crimes. The system that had failed individual victims was finally responding to collective evidence. Juliana's final manipulation attempt before the investigation closed in was her most desperate. She threatened vague but serious harm to the community if her family faced prosecution. The threats were recorded, documented, and immediately reported to law enforcement. The threat was taken seriously. Law enforcement coordinated with school officials and community leaders to assess and address the danger. Juliana's family had revealed themselves as not just psychological predators, but potential physical threats when cornered. The middle section of our story was ending, but the final confrontation loomed ahead. We'd exposed the truth, built our defenses, and united our community. Now came the hardest part: seeing justice through to the end while protecting ourselves from a family that had nothing left to lose. The courthouse steps felt cold under my feet as I arrived early that morning. The federal investigators had finally coordinated with local authorities after months of evidence gathering. I watched Juliana's family arrive in separate vehicles, their lawyers flanking them like shields. The confident manipulation I'd witnessed for so long had been replaced by something harder, more desperate. Inside the courtroom, I took my seat among dozens of other witnesses, former classmates, business owners, parents, all united by the systematic targeting we'd endured. The prosecutor laid out the evidence methodically. Bank records showing suspicious transfers, communication logs revealing coordinated information gathering, financial documents exposing years of fraud totaling over $40,000 across multiple victims. Juliana sat between her parents, her appearance carefully crafted to project innocence. But I noticed the calculating way she scanned the room, cataloging who was present, who might still be manipulated. Her fingers tapped against the table in what I recognized as her planning rhythm. The first day of testimony revealed the full scope of their operation. Witnesses from 3 different schools described identical patterns. Teenagers befriended, families researched, businesses targeted. The prosecutor presented evidence showing how Juliana's volunteer work had been cover for gathering financial information on vulnerable families. My turn came on the second day. I described finding the psychological profiles in Juliana's room, the systematic way she'd analyzed our pressure points. I explained how she'd used our friendship to access my father's business information. The defense attorney tried to paint me as a jealous friend, but our documented evidence spoke louder than their narrative. Dylan testified about the recordings, playing excerpts that showed Juliana's calculated manipulation. The courtroom grew silent as they heard her calmly discussing how to break each relationship, how to position herself as the victim. The girl who'd claimed innocence had left too much evidence of her guilt. Jen's testimony was particularly powerful. She brought copies of the threatening messages, evidence of the systematic harassment she'd endured for considering telling the truth. She described how Juliana had gathered information about her family's financial struggles, then used it to ensure her silence. The investigation had uncovered something even more disturbing. Juliana hadn't just learned these tactics from her parents. She'd been actively involved since age 14. Training documents showed how they'd taught her to identify targets, gather intelligence, manipulate social dynamics. She wasn't a victim of her family's crimes. She was a willing participant. Rebecca's father testified about the business intelligence Juliana had tried to extract. He'd found evidence that his company's private bid information had been leaked to competitors, traced back to conversations his daughter had innocently shared with Juliana. The financial damage was substantial but focused, designed to hurt without triggering major investigations. The defense tried to argue that Juliana was manipulated by her criminal parents, but evidence contradicted this. Text messages showed her suggesting new targets, proposing manipulation strategies, even correcting her parents' approaches. She'd been an eager student who'd surpassed her teachers. During a recess, I overheard Juliana's mother making phone calls, speaking in the same coded language I'd heard before. Security quickly intervened, discovering she was trying to coordinate witness intimidation from inside the courthouse. The desperation was palpable. The private investigator presented financial forensics, showing how the family had used gathered intelligence, insider trading based on overheard conversations, business deals undermined using private information, small enough to avoid major scrutiny, but systematic enough to fund their lifestyle. Multiple victims described the same pattern of escalation: first friendship, then information gathering, then subtle manipulation. When discovered, they'd face systematic destruction of credibility. The playbook was consistent across years and locations. Juliana's psychiatric records, subpoenaed for the trial, revealed something chilling. Even during her hospitalization, she'd been gathering information on other patients, documenting their vulnerabilities. Her therapist testified that Juliana had shown no genuine remorse, only frustration at being caught. The school counselor who'd revealed Juliana's deliberate transfer request provided crucial testimony. Documents showed how Juliana had researched our school's social dynamics for months, identified key targets, even created preliminary psychological profiles before arriving. The transfer wasn't random. It was a planned operation. Evidence from Juliana's previous schools painted an even darker picture. At each location, she'd left behind damaged families, failed businesses, destroyed relationships, always moving before consequences caught up, always positioning herself as the victim of jealous peers. The moment that changed everything came when prosecutors presented Juliana's own writings, journals detailing her manipulation strategies, rating her success at destroying relationships, planning future targets. Her own words demolished any defense of innocence or manipulation by her parents. I watched Juliana's face as her journal entries were read aloud. For the first time, the mask completely slipped. The cold calculation in her eyes was visible to everyone. She'd documented her crimes in detail, confident she'd never be caught. The defense's case crumbled as witness after witness confirmed the patterns. Former friends Juliana had recruited and then discarded. Business owners whose companies had suffered mysterious setbacks. Families whose private struggles had been exploited for profit. Closing arguments brought everything into focus. The prosecutor outlined how a family had turned their teenage daughter into a weapon, using her to gather intelligence for financial crimes. But evidence showed Juliana hadn't been a tool. She'd been an enthusiastic partner who'd refined their methods. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty verdicts on multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and extortion for all 3 family members. Juliana's age meant she'd face juvenile penalties, but her parents were looking at serious prison time. During sentencing, victims gave impact statements. Business owners described financial struggles. Parents detailed the toll on their families. Students shared how the psychological manipulation had affected their ability to trust. The human cost of their crimes became undeniable. Juliana's statement to the court was revealing. She expressed regret only for being caught, framing herself as a victim of circumstance. Even facing justice, she couldn't abandon the manipulation tactics that had defined her life. The judge saw through it immediately. Her parents received 8 to 10 years each, with requirements for financial restitution to victims. Assets they'd gained through fraud were seized. The network they'd spent years building was systematically dismantled by authorities. Juliana's sentence reflected both her age and her active participation. 2 years in a juvenile facility with mandatory psychological treatment, 5 years of probation afterward, restrictions on internet access and financial activities. The judge emphasized this was about rehabilitation, not just punishment. The community community response was mixed. Some felt justice had been served. Others worried about what would happen when Juliana was released. Support groups formed for victims, sharing resources for healing and protecting against future manipulation. I learned that Juliana's facility specialized in treating personality disorders and criminal behavior. Reports suggested she was a challenging patient, still attempting to manipulate staff and other residents. Change, if it came at all, would be slow. The financial restitution process began immediately. Families who'd lost money through the targeting scheme started receiving compensation from seized assets. It didn't erase the damage, but provided some measure of justice. Our school implemented new policies about information sharing and student privacy. Counselors received training on identifying manipulation tactics. What we'd learned through pain became protective knowledge for future students. Dylan moved forward by focusing on advocacy. He started speaking at other schools about recognizing manipulation, sharing his story to help others avoid similar targeting. His athletic scholarship had survived the scandal, giving him a platform to create change. Jen found strength in her truth being validated. She pursued journalism, inspired by the student reporters who'd helped expose Juliana's pattern. Her experience with information warfare had taught her the power of documented truth. Rebecca's family strengthened their business security protocols. They hired cybersecurity experts, implemented strict information controls. The vulnerability Juliana had exploited became a catalyst for protecting other families. The investigation's ripple effects continued for months. Other communities where Juliana's family had operated came forward with similar stories. A task force formed to address the intersection of teenage social manipulation and financial crimes. I returned to normal life slowly. Trust came harder now. Friendships required more verification. But the experience had also shown me the power of community unity against predators. We'd stopped a sophisticated operation through collective action. Updates from the juvenile facility indicated Juliana was participating in therapy, though her progress remained questionable. Her therapist noted she was highly intelligent and skilled at appearing compliant while maintaining her core behaviors. The Financial Crimes Unit published a report on the case, identifying it as a new pattern in family-based fraud operations. Using teenagers for intelligence gathering was rare but effective. Our case became a training example for investigators. 6 months after sentencing, I received a letter from Juliana. Even from detention, she attempted manipulation, apologizing while subtly threatening to reveal misunderstandings about my family. I forwarded it to authorities immediately. Old patterns died hard. Her parents' appeal was denied. Evidence was too comprehensive. Patterns too clear. I'm feeling such a mix of emotions watching Juliana's true nature be exposed through her own journals. Dylan is an actual GOAT for turning his pain into purpose by speaking at schools to protect other kids. They'd built their own cage through meticulous documentation of their crimes. The very thoroughness that had made them dangerous became their downfall. Community healing took various forms. Some families moved away, seeking fresh starts. Others became advocates for fraud prevention. The shared trauma had created unexpected bonds between former strangers. The animal shelter where Juliana had volunteered implemented new screening procedures, background checks, reference verification, limited access to personal information. Her infiltration had taught valuable lessons about institutional vulnerability. A year later, the full impact was clearer. 43 families across 3 states had been affected. Combined financial damages exceeded $200,000. The psychological damage was harder to quantify, but equally real. I chose to study psychology in college, driven by the need to understand how someone could become so calculating. The questions haunted me. Was Juliana born manipulative, or had her family created a monster? The answers remained elusive. Updates on her progress were limited, but suggested minimal change. She'd become a model prisoner superficially while maintaining her core traits. Rehabilitation seemed unlikely without genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing, which she still refused. The community had grown stronger through shared adversity. Information networks remained active, watching for similar threats. We'd learned that predators could hide behind any face, use any relationship as a weapon. My final visit to the courthouse came during a restitution hearing. Watching Juliana via video link from detention, I saw the same calculating eyes, the same practiced expressions. But now everyone else saw them too. The mask had been permanently removed. Moving forward meant accepting that some people choose darkness. Juliana's family had turned crime into a generational practice, corrupting their daughter from childhood. Breaking that cycle would require more than just imprisonment. I found peace in knowing we'd protected future victims. Every family warned, every business secured, every student educated about manipulation tactics meant fewer opportunities for predators. Our pain had become preventive power. The story spread through legitimate channels: law enforcement training, fraud prevention seminars, school safety programs. Not as sensational gossip, but as educational truth. Knowledge was the best defense against manipulation. 5 years seemed both long and short for Juliana's potential return to society. Would genuine change occur, or would she simply become more sophisticated? The community remained vigilant, prepared either way. My transformation from naive defender to informed protector was complete. I'd learned to balance compassion with caution, to verify before trusting. The girl who desperately wanted to believe in Juliana's innocence had grown into someone who could recognize and resist manipulation. Looking back, the signs had been there from the beginning. The too perfect victim story, the calculated kindness, the strategic targeting. We'd been too focused on surface drama to see the deeper game being played. Our class graduated with hard-won wisdom about trust and verification. We'd survived a sophisticated predator and emerged stronger. The bonds formed in opposition to Juliana's manipulation proved more durable than any she'd tried to destroy. The case file closed with conviction secured and restitution ongoing, but its lessons lived on in every family that learned to protect their information, every student who recognized manipulation tactics, every community that understood the importance of collective vigilance. Justice had been served through the system, not through revenge or retaliation. We'd fought Juliana's darkness with truth and unity, proving that manipulation ultimately fails against coordinated resistance. The girl who'd promised to destroy things had only destroyed herself. What started as such a dark story ended with real light and healing. Thanks so much for reading through this story all the way with me. I hope you have a really wonderful rest of your day.